Welcome, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Dr. Peggy McIntosh. She is Senior Research Scientist of the Wellesley Centers for Women at Wellesley College in Massachusetts. She's born in Brooklyn, New York. She's a Harvard graduate, and she's a longtime educator. She's the author of 40 chapters and articles, including the classic essay, White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Dr. McIntosh is also the founder of the National SEED Project on Inclusive Curriculum. SEED stands for Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. Dr. McIntosh has spoken at more than 600 colleges, universities, and organizations around the world. She is very busy and highly sought after, and she joins us this morning to talk about an incredible subject that there is no blame or shame that should be ascribed to this subject this morning. Only really her work and her own personal empirical data on white privilege. The book that we are talking about this morning is On Privilege, Fraudulence, and Teaching as Learning. Dr. McIntosh, good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
It is so...
I have watched your show, and I'm delighted to be on the receiving end of your question.
Wow. We are delighted and honored, Dr. McIntosh, to sit at your feet and to have this conversation. And as I said in the introduction, you know, sometimes when you start to talk about white privilege, people immediately turn off. But I love what you say in some of the writings that you've written. This is not about shame and or blame. And so I want you to talk about being a feminist many years ago and really trying to figure out the differences between men and women, which led you into a deeper dive.
I was leading seminars at Wellesley College on the subject of bringing women into the main curriculum, because most reading lists in college courses, even at a women's college, were filled with the names of men and the deeds of men and the perspectives of men. So I was leading faculty groups to discuss how can we bring women into the curriculum of college? And the men were very nice. And yet, inadvertently, they were insulting to us in a way that we couldn't even name. So one year, the question came up from a woman, why can't we put these materials on women into all of the liberal arts courses we're teaching? And a very nice man said, you see, when you're trying to get students acquainted with the founding principles of any academic discipline, you can't put in soft stuff. None of us, men or women, said anything. But I remember thinking later, he doesn't understand labor pains. We're not soft. But we were wordless. That's the key thing. We had no words. 2 years later, in a similar conversation, a woman said, why don't we put in the materials on women in the freshman year, the freshman courses? And another very nice man said, in an explanatory way, well, you see, the problem is, in those first year courses, you're laying the foundation blocks for knowledge and the student is choosing her discipline. And if you want a student to think in a disciplined way, you can't put in extras. And again, none of us said anything. A couple of days later, I thought, born of a woman. And come to think of it, everybody in the room was born of a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And what has been done to our minds to make us think that women are extra and to accept a man saying that? And everybody in the face of the earth is born
Mm-hmm.
of a woman. But I was not about blame, shame, or guilt, because the way I would put it now is we didn't ask to be born into the systems that were in place when we were born, and they sorted and ranked us. However, at the time I thought, if everybody on the face of the earth has been born of a woman, and she's not visible in the major knowledge system of college or university, what has been done to our minds must be like this. I know it was done to my mind at Harvard. We were taught men have knowledge. All the professors were men. Men make more knowledge. They had to publish. Then they publish and profess knowledge, and they are the backbone of the knowledge system. And men are knowers, and knowledge itself is male. I thought that's what was done to our minds. But it's nobody's fault, really. It was very unusual to find a woman saying, doesn't my grandmother belong in this picture? Doesn't my mother belong in this picture? Doesn't my sister belong in this picture? So at that time, back in the 1983-4 period, Black women were saying, it not in so many words, but they were implying it in the Combahee River Collective statement, that white women are oppressive to work with. And I didn't like what I was seeing, but at some level, I had to believe them. And I said, oh, is this it? The men are oppressive when they call us soft or extra. Do we do that? Do we white women do that? And I realized in a parallel fashion that was very hard for me to accept. I was seeing that I was taught white people have knowledge. White people make more knowledge. White people publish and profess knowledge as professors. And by then I was a professor in an all-white department. And I realized whites have learned, and I had learned, whites are knowers, and the whole knowledge system itself.
Did you have that revelation, Dr. McIntosh, at that moment when you ask yourself that question, do I do that? Do we do that? Was it an instant revelation or was it denial?
It was 2 years of hedging, hoping that the question I'd asked would be answered. No, it was perfectly right for white people to be in control. I hedged, it meant emotionally, until about 2 years after that last seminar, when I thought, yes, we do what the men do, take for granted power. I didn't have the word privilege yet. Take for granted that we have power and we should have power. Yes, we do it. I was taught to do it. So the things that made it realist to me were, first of all, that all the grants I was getting for the work I was doing came from foundations run by white people. All the money, in other words, was tied up. Even philanthropic money was tied up with whites. And then also the reading lists, the whole college I was teaching in, they were just dominated by the assumption that whites were knowers and that the knowledge system, really good knowledge, sound knowledge, detailed knowledge, scholarly knowledge, was white. And then I couldn't get myself to think up any other ways other than the knowledge system and the money system working for me as a white person. And I was angry at myself for not coming up with any further examples, because I was good at making lists of examples of everything but that. And I went to bed one night challenging myself. Really, I was praying.
Mm-hmm.
If I had anything I didn't earn beside the knowledge system and the money system working for me, show me. My husband says I didn't actually shout,
Mm-hmm.
but I felt as though I was shouting to myself,
Mm-hmm.
to level with myself.
Mm.
And in the middle of the night, up swam the first example. And it was perfect. Like, I'm an English teacher, and it amuses me that my subconscious giving me the next 45 examples, sent them up in perfectly punctuated, complicated English.
So there was no denying it.
They deserved A's, except that they were so unpleasant. Realizing that I had them and not everybody had them was so unpleasant. But I would have given them, yes, as an English teacher, A.
Wow.
The first one was, I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. You can hear it has hedges in it.
Mm.
I didn't want to make any example seem any simpler than my experience was.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the first one. And night after night, they came up. And after 2 months, I had a list of 46.
And so you had prayed and you had asked God to show you if you had been like the men, if you had received things that you had not been deserving of. When you get the first example, and then night after night, because you ask the question why, and these examples start to come up, how do you start then to internalize what you never could have imagined to be true?
I had asked my subconscious.
Okay.
And it was my authority. And if I had denied what it sent me each night, I would have been denying myself.
But that could have been easy to do.
No, because they kept coming up. They were persistent. They were very well educated on my life.
Mm-hmm.
They were authority on my life.
Mm-hmm. So then night after night, after they keep coming up and they're undeniable, how then do you say, I've got all of this information, and because it comes from my subconscious that is an authority, I am responsible not to hedge anymore, not to move along like I didn't receive this?
I didn't at the time use the word responsible. I said I have been given this gift of insight into what it is like for me to be white. And I didn't know any of this. But this is very important. I can't can't let it go. I can't let it go. This is an important way in which my life is defined, and I have to keep writing. By the way, after the first one swam up, I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. I switched on the light and I wrote it down, and I thought it was trivial. And I looked at it in the morning and I still thought it was trivial. Now I think it's huge. It keeps me from having to feel like the lonely or the only in group situations or workplace situations. It's huge, but I dismissed it. That is, the uppermost part of my mind was saying, this doesn't matter. So you might ask, in a way you are asking, why didn't you let them all go?
Right.
Yeah. And you've mentioned the word responsibility. Actually, I think maybe it was more scholarly. This is information about my place in the world and the many layers of unearned advantage that it has. And I need to know this to be accurate about my life, about other white people's lives. I need to know this for the sake, I tell you, I think it's partly scholarly. I was trying to be accurate, but the subconscious didn't care about accuracy. It cared more about the emotional truth of ease, exemption from being impeded, disrespected, victimized. So, but I had been teaching at University of Denver Black women's literature, and I had taught it, this was in the 70s, without any thought of white privilege. I thought about the women whom we read, how terrible for them to endure what they endured, but never how exempt for me. I didn't think about my exemption from the bad aspects of the world that whites had built. It was ignorance. So what did Black women in those classes feel? I think they felt probably she's clueless. She's clueless about prejudice. She's clueless about our lives, but she's trying. She's making an attempt. She's teaching Black women's literature.
Wow.
Now you might ask, why didn't Black women teach that literature? But there was only one Black woman in the department of 33 people. One of my great learnings was from her, Gwendolyn Thomas, the day she said to me, in pretty casual conversation, I wouldn't want to be white if he paid me $5 million. I was so surprised. I had assumed that she must want to be white.
Wow.
And she wouldn't touch. And $5 million went a long way in those days. It was
Why did she say that to you?
Being white, the thought of having to be white and have the kind of personality that the whites were encouraged in was anathema to her. The worst possible thing would be to wake up white.
Wow. Let's take a break here, but when we come back, we'll have more of this riveting and very interesting conversation. Dr. Peggy McIntosh is our guest. Stay on point. We're back after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Dr. Peggy McIntosh. She's a longtime educator, I guess maybe 4 decades and counting, Dr. McIntosh?
Yes,
And
five decades
five
in the class.
decades. And as we come to your work and your papers on white privilege and breaking down your experience, before we went to break, you were talking about being a professor, and in that setting, 33 professors, only one Black. And you come to the knowledge that you have been privileged as a white woman. And you begin to look at the plight of Black women, especially Black women, because they really posed the idea that caused this greater search. When you find it, you believe that academia needs to understand it, but it's not popular. Nobody wants to hear it. And most white people feel like I can't be responsible for what my ancestors did. What I've earned is meritorious. I have earned it. So how do you then start to climb this uphill battle of sharing this information?
I asked myself, if I have all this unearned power as a white person, how can I use that power to weaken the system that gave it to me? So I wrote a list of 16 ways that I have used that power to try to weaken the system. And one in the town of Newton, Massachusetts, was to visit the police department and protest the victimization of young Black boys. One was just driving home at night, but he was pulled over by the cops who didn't think he belonged in the neighborhood. And he lived there. And the policeman made him wake up his parents. There they were in their bedclothes looking down the stairs at the police. And the police had no idea that they would remember that the rest of their lives. The policeman said, I just wanted to make sure this fellow belongs in this household. And I went to the police department about that. And the response from the captain was, ma'am, we're just trying to protect you. And then a similar thing happened, and I went back to the police department. And by then I'd thought through that line. And I got the same line. We're just protecting you as a citizen. And I said, oh, no, you're not. This is a protection racket. You have created the bad race relations that you claim to be protecting me from. They didn't do it again, according to the police blotter. We used to have in Newton the police blotter revealed, so everybody could see what the incidents had been. A part of me was very proud of myself that I had used mob language about a protection racket. Mm-hmm. But another part of me said, Peggy, the reason you could get away with insulting the police that way or telling the truth to them is that you're white. That's just one more example of how your privilege protects you. Anyway, there are 16 things on that list. Some of them are pretty academic, like changing the reading lists, but some are like the police encounter. I go to supermarkets sometimes and say there isn't any soul food here. And my colleagues in Wellesley are tired of having to drive 12 miles into Boston to get soul food. And I will list some of the things they can't buy in the local supermarket. And then they will say, well, ma'am, there isn't any call for that kind of thing here. I say, if you would stock these foods, there would be some call. Mm-hmm. And so I do my part trying to open the doors that white people automatically keep closed. Mm. And I was happy to hear on another Zoom call I was on yesterday with people from Harvard reminiscing about their time in 1956. I was happy to hear one said, the greatest education I got at Harvard was learning the difference between my experience up above in the dining room eating Harvard food
Mm.
and the men who were providing us with the food, cooking it down in the basement. They came from the neighboring Somerville. I learned the differences between Somerville life and Cambridge life. It stood me in good stead the rest of my life.
Mm.
That he learned about white privilege, class privilege, academic privilege. It was very exciting to me to hear him say this, that it was the best education he received in college.
And so when you start on this journey to unpacking many of those privileges, it wasn't received well. And in fact, there were those that said, we're not going to publish this. Why?
Oh, yeah.
Where did that tenacity not to quit, where did that come from?
Actually, that came from money. The Working Papers Committee of the Wellesley College Center for Research on Women wouldn't publish this paper. They said it has no footnote. So I said, okay, I get it. We are a center for research on women. A lot of people think women are nonsense anyway. So if a woman without footnotes is just a nobody. But I began to charge 50 cents per copy that professors made for their own classes. And 40,000 copies were made by professors who paid me money that first year. 20,000 I earned. I took my paper back to the Working Papers Committee and I said, I'm making a lot of money from this paper. And if you would publish it as a working paper for the centers, why, everybody would benefit. Everybody in this building would benefit. And you could charge $6 because that's what we charged in those days for working papers. They said, we'll take another look at it. And they came back with the same verdict. They said, we can't publish this. It's merely anecdotal. And we have a reputation to uphold for accurate, informed research. So you can see they thought my subconscious wasn't accurate or informed. No, but 3 months later, that same voice that gave me most of the 46 examples woke me up in the middle of the night and said, Freud didn't have footnotes. And I took that to the committee. I said, I understand, but you know, Freud didn't have footnotes. And they looked at each other, all these PhDs in political science and psychology and sociology, they looked at each other like this. And then they shrugged. And the head of the committee said, okay. And it became our bestseller and remained that for 30 years, together with Nan Stein's work on gender violence in schools.
Wow. Let's get a break here. We'll be back with more right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Dr. Peggy McIntosh, and she has written incredible papers and articles on equity and inclusion. And we're talking about, for the purpose of this conversation, we're talking about many things, but white privilege, unpacking the invisible knapsack. And during the break, I was saying to you, Dr. McIntosh, that I believe that you are many years ahead of your time. When you started on this journey, you know, very few people or very few voices were being heard when it came to systematic racism and systems in place that privilege was given to those sometimes without merit, not all the time, but many times. And so when you fast forward all of these years and you see people talking about critical race theory and systematic racism. How does that resonate with you now?
Well, the right wing in the United States has stirred up the idea that this demonic thing called critical race theory is being taught to us and it's not good for the country. That's nonsense. The critical race theory was developed by lawyers for use in law schools. But the thing I'm going to rescue for this conversation, the critical race debate, is that it is good to encourage Americans to think systemically. And we were not taught to think in terms of systems, but only in terms of individuals. So what we need is more acknowledgement that systems of advantage and disadvantage exist. We never had a Marx in this culture, so we were allowed to start with a myth of individual salvation, and now individual success. And the myth of meritocracy is grounded in the idea that the only unit of society is the individual, and whatever you end up with must be what you wanted and worked for and earned and deserved. And that's a myth. People don't get what they deserve. But that mythology of meritocracy does protect. It protects capitalism, it protects individualism, and it protects people from taking any responsibility for the welfare of the whole group. The other big myths that keep us from seeing systemically are the myth of manifest destiny, which says God wanted us to take all the land from indigenous people who were here, or take over the Philippines is another example. And then the myth of white racelessness, that race is a word applying to people like you, but not like me. In other words, the myth that whites don't have racial identity. Only people of color do. That's another bad myth. Another bad myth is the myth of white moral and, I would say, managerial superiority, that we're better than other people at managing things. And that's why there are discrepancies between what darker skinned people get in the way of advancement, support, love, and starting early, respect from teachers, but big gaps between what whites have come to expect and don't see as systemic, take it personally, and what whites get, which is the benefit of the doubt, the information about opportunities, the faith of the teachers that we can do the work, the schoolwork. All of those send us ahead.
Wow. And so as you're on this journey and you're birthing all of this information, because I saw it sort of as a metaphorical birthing, like all of the information that you've written. So when you look at your colleagues and people in your family and people in your community that don't necessarily or may not necessarily believe these truths, how did you deal with that?
I had this conversation yesterday with a group of undergraduates at Northwestern who were concerned about how hard it is to talk to their parents about white privilege. And I'm sure I disappointed some of them because I said, don't try. Or rather, in a glib way, I said, don't introduce the subject of white privilege at an all-white Thanksgiving dinner.
Wow.
It'll just blow everything out of the water. But what I thought was there are millions and billions of people coming from the colonial system of white takeover of other nations. There are millions and billions of people who have suffered under white privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And why don't you teach them? And why don't you use your energy and your whiteness to improve lives for larger numbers rather than taxing your parents with this?
Wow.
Now, my feeling is your parents weren't raised to think systemically. They think only in terms of individuals. It's not their fault. They spent years taking care of you and trying to make you into the best sort of person they could imagine. They were very proud of you. They kept shoveling pride onto you whenever you individually did something that they approved of.
Mm-hmm.
Why not let your parents, in effect, rest in peace?
Mm.
Because is it worth breaking the family fabric? If they're not outright racist, they may be outright racist. But if they're not, if they're just oblivious whites, why peck on them? Why pick on them? Why not let them? So I should have said, what the truth is, I didn't try to persuade my parents that they had white privilege. I had other fish to fry, and I was recommending. Well, I'm sure that some of the students in that Northwestern class on multiculturalism were disappointed. But I read them my list of 16 things I've done to try to weaken the system that gave me so much privilege. And I see that as my form of reparations.
Wow.
Be going to a police station and accusing them of creating bad race relations. This is a form of reparation.
Wow. And so, did you suffer the weight of sharing this message with people who really don't?
Oh, yes. Oh, I have lots of hate mail, including people who hope I will die soon. But Rush Limbaugh said Peggy McIntosh has ruined education in the United States.
Wow.
How much more of an attack?
Right.
The directors of my Center for Research on Women, now called the Centers for Women at Wellesley, were helpful. They said, the first one said, don't answer. Keep doing your work.
Mm-hmm.
Don't answer. So I would lie in bed thinking up my rebuttals to Rush Limbaugh, who's helped to ruin American sensibilities with regard to race. I would lie awake thinking of what I should have said. But the women directors of my center really won out. We are not here to fight. Let's be as good as we can be in the work we do. Let's not see ourselves as pugilistic fighting.
Wow.
So I have to, but I hate to read all the racist stuff I do read and see and hear on public media. And right now, I don't use my energy to try to rebut others. I'm not great at argumentation. In fact, what I recommend in every meeting I go to is that we sit in a circle and each person speak in turn about their actual experience of what we're talking about, not their opinions.
Mm-hmm.
But their actual experience. And if they don't have any, they can just pass and we go around the circle. And I invented this as a mode of speaking that is not about argument. And it's about testimony. You tell your experience you were heard,
Mm-hmm.
and others tell their experience and they are heard. And I call it serial testimony because you do it in a circle in order. Everybody will be, and ideally there's a timer, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. Ideally, everybody is heard and hears. But that's what I believe in to make democracy.
Dr.
make
McIntosh,
democracy.
you have been amazing. I believe that all of your work is tour de force. And I think that every human being, no matter what their race or their ethnicity, should absolutely read your papers. It gives us all pause and it makes us all think. You are an agent of change. Thank you so much.
Yes, that of God in every person, in the case of me, turned into a wish to use that English teacher sensibility to write about these insights. Not just to have the insights, but to try to put them into words, even though, as I said to you earlier in the program, I don't believe reality comes in words. But that's what I was given to work with.
Indeed. Dr. McIntosh, thank you for taking the time and thank you for your body of work.
Thank you so much. Now, one white privilege here is you're calling me Dr. McIntosh. You asked me to call you Carlette. That's white privilege.
Is it now? You know what I thought it was? Respect for the education and the position.
But you and I are each equally human. So I should call you by a more formal name if you are calling me by a more formal name.
Wow.
So, Miss Christmas, thank you for the gifts you have brought as yourself and as an agent of Christmas.
Thank you so much. You're welcome back anytime. Hey, everybody, stay on point. We're back after this.